The consummation of all these things, the promises, the covenants, the prophecies, the restoration of the former kingdom, Christ sitting on David's throne, and so forth, it all starts with Christ's return to the earth. The Scripture provides irrefutable and irresistible evidence that He will come back in order to accomplish these things. Let's look at a few verses. Matthew 25:31. When the Son of Man shall come in His glory and all His holy angels with Him, then shall He sit upon the throne of His glory. When He comes back. 1 Corinthians 15:23. But every man in his own order. Christ the firstfruits, afterward they that are Christ. When? At His coming. Colossians 3:4. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, it is then, at that point, shall you also appear with Him in glory. There's nobody in heaven with glory. It's when He comes back. What a blessing to be with those that He chooses to join Him at that day. John 14:3. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you here, not there, here. I will receive you when I come again unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Acts 1:10-11. And as they looked steadfastly toward heaven as He went up, behold, two men in white apparel said, Ye men of Galilee, why do you stand here gazing up into heaven? The same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as ye have seen Him go. Now we'll look at one of the primary prophecies that points not only towards Christ's return, but that illustrates the manner in which He'll come and how He will begin to accomplish His whole purpose and our hope. The verses read tonight before we started were from Daniel 2. And they were about the dream that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had. And as we saw, none of the magicians, none of the people in his land could have had any idea what that thing meant. Daniel was called in, and he not only recounted the dream, without it being told him, he told the interpretation thereof by God's hand. It's one of the most powerful prophecies that tells of Christ's return to earth to subdue and put down all nations and kingdoms, to replace it with His own. Just reading a few of those verses. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold the image. Now, as I read this, you can look at the image, and you can follow the portions that he describes in the colors and the parts of metal. So I'm going to read the verses. You can look at the slide and see how this matches. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold a great image. The image's head was of gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part iron and part clay. Thou sawest that a stone was cut without hands, bottom right, which smote the image upon his feet. And the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold was broken to pieces together and ground up. Like chaff in the summer threshing floors, the wind just blew it all away. And the stone that smote the image grew into a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So here is the vision. And he interprets it. Daniel then tells us exactly what the vision means. He says these are going to be kingdoms, one after the other, starting from the top, working down through history in succession. He says, Thou, our king, art this head of gold, and after thee shall another kingdom of silver, and another kingdom of brass, and another fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of clay, part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. It's going to get split up. And they shall not cleave together, even the iron does not mix with clay. And Daniel made the interpretation, and history shows it has come to pass almost completely. The head of gold was the Babylonian Empire. I don't know if you can see in the back the years and so forth. The silver was the Medo-Persians. Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian. The brass was the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. The iron was the Roman Empire. It reached its height in 117, and then it split into two parts, eastern and western. What a specific accuracy that is with two legs, left and right, eastern and western empires. And the iron mixed with clay, which was the divided Roman Empire that got broken apart by the barbarian tribes, and to this day, it is still divided Europe and so forth. Now we're going to come back to look at the stone. Let's first quickly look at the historical context of the prophecy and some maps to show the territory that clearly shows after the fact these came to pass and what they entail. The dream took place around 600 BC. That's when Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. Second year of King Nebuchadnezzar. And again, this works from top to bottom. The oldest is the Babylonian 600 BC, and to the bottom down to when the stone strikes, you have a period of about 2,600 years. It takes us right up to present day Christ's return. It's about a 26-year period. And the iron and clay is where we are today. All right, so here's some maps. Again, I don't know if you can see in the back. Head of gold was Babylon. That's the purple portion on the map. It's the current location of modern-day Iraq. The city of Babylon was located on the river Euphrates, close to the site what is now the city of Baghdad, actually. While in power, Nebuchadnezzar made a number of attacks against Jerusalem. The first was in 607 BC, during the reign of King Jehoiakim, and he seized captives, including Daniel. So that's how Daniel got to be in the chambers of King Nebuchadnezzar. At its height, the empire ranged from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, from Asia Minor to Egypt. Also on the map you can see in brown the Median Empire. In chapter 5 of Daniel, we have the account of Darius the Mede taking over the throne of Babylonian King Belshazzar. But his rule, Darius' rule the Mede, was very short-lived. Only 2 years later, here we go, here's the Persian Empire, 540 BC. 2 years later, the city was invaded in one night. This is again in the scripture. It's a great account. Cyrus, king of Persia, he dammed up the river that ran into the city. The Euphrates dried up, the soldiers went underneath in the river and came up on the other side and were able to overtake the city in one night, just like that. Entered the city and conquered it all, the whole empire. The Medo-Persian Empire was a combination, therefore, of two empires. The older Median and the newer Persian, which engulfed it as the greater of the two. At its height, you can see it stretched from India to Ethiopia and lasted about 200 years, from 542 BC to 334 BC. Next map, we have the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. This is the empire of brass, those belly and thighs of brass on the image that we saw, which Daniel says should bear rule over all the earth. Alexander the Great is perhaps one of the most respected generals and brilliant military leaders in all of history. He defeated much of the then known world in only 13 years by the age of 33. He became king of Macedonia when his father died in 336, and he conquered the Greek states in only 5 years after that. That is some swift conquering. In one battle, and this is a powerful illustration of the divine hand in my personal view, in one battle before he had fully conquered Persia, it is recorded that the Persian king assembled the largest army ever created, over 1 million men from 40 different nations, to try and stop Alexander's progress. The Persian king was still defeated by Alexander, who had no money and only 35,000 men. Alexander was only 25 years old at the time. And remember, this is 300 years after Daniel had said that this empire would arise. God's prophecies will be fulfilled in spite of circumstances that may indicate otherwise. The divine hand accomplishes all. Alexander died a few years later at 33 from a fever. The Greeks ruled about 150 years. Next was the Roman Empire. Again, the contrast of color, you can see it better there than it is on my screen. In yellow is the Roman Empire. It ruled for nearly 600 years, from 197 BC to 476 AD. Notice the tenure and extent. The Roman Empire is widely considered the greatest empire in history. That's why Daniel said it was of iron, strongest of these four metals symbolized. There's really been nothing in history to equal the Roman Empire and what they accomplished. And we know in Scripture, in the New Testament, it was during Christ's day, Rome is the one that ruled all of that territory. They were in power. You'll notice it goes basically all of Europe, the English Isles, all of Northern Africa, Egypt, the Promised Land, Asia Minor, and back. Now here you see yellow and pink. Remember those two legs of iron? We said that the empire divided. About 395, the emperor dies, and it's split permanently, Eastern and Western empires. Again, perfectly matching the prophecy, as we said, which in this case now was 1,000 years prior when Daniel made it.